So welcome everybody. This is part 2 of the BGA FRTOL course, December 23. Tonight I'm going to do the talking because theoretically I've got the better internet connection, but as I mentioned to a few people, my fiber broadband has gone down. I'm sitting on a mobile connection, so hopefully you'll see me okay. Let me share my screen with you.
That's the scene. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so BGA FRTOL course part 2. I've got a couple of messages about logistics. I'm going to talk not for very long about the key messages this week, and then we're going to do the important bit, which is the practice. So the logistics, right? This is the last session before. Sorry, this is the last but one session before Christmas. The last session before Christmas is next Tuesday, and then we break for a few weeks, and we start again on Tuesday, the 9th of January. You will have received a message from Zoom that says something different, but that's a consequence of trying to get a single Zoom link that you can use for all the sessions, I'm afraid. Since last week, I've made a few changes to the website. I eventually decided that the course materials page was getting too big, and if you had a thin internet connection, it would probably take ages to load. So I've split it into different parts, which you'll see if you come to it. So there's a part 1, part 2, and so on. The frequently answered questions, I've started a new lot for this session, and also the Zoom recordings of the sessions. But in both cases, at the top of those pages, I put a link to last year. So if you really want to go back and see what's happened previously, you can. Right, so let's get to the meat of the business. Let's have a look at the key messages. We're going to review the initial and full messages, talk a bit about how to address the ground station, so what's their call sign. And this bit's pretty important. Understand the types of controller and what they offer. And controller in quotes there because they're not all controllers, and know what has to be read back. So the initial message. The call sign of the ATC unit, our call sign, and the request. So how do we know what the call sign of the ATC unit is? Not always obvious, actually. For Cambridge, for example, it can be a couple of different things. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to mute everybody.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say.
Just I'm going to try to, Okay. It's not letting me mute because I'm screen sharing, I think. So could you mute yourselves, please, if you're not muted? Okay, so how do we know? Cambridge, for example, might be Cambridge Approach or Cambridge Radar. Some people might be, I don't know, Shoreham Radio or Shoreham Information. And we don't necessarily know. We might be able to look it up, but they can change day to day or hour by hour. So the big thing we can do is listen in first. And if we hear them talking to somebody else, then we'll tend to hear their call sign. We can ask friends. Sometimes other people will know what their call sign is going to be. We can look in flight guides. Sky Demon's quite good. If you take the airfields and outlandings information that I publish, you'll have in your radio, in your nav system. If you look at the notes, it will tell you what their call sign is probably going to be. Or you can look in the AIP. So if you go into the electronic AIP that NATS do, you can Google NATS AISEAIP if you want. Have a look in part 2 you'll find their call sign. But the classic one is you just listen first. Then my call sign, which we know we've talked about, and then what the request is. The typical requests that you might have for people, it might be you want to enter their zone or their ATZ to thermal. It might be that you want to join, which means you want to land, a zone transit, a MATS penetration, or very frequently a service, and often a basic service or a variation thereof. So that might be something like a basic service to cross your extended centre line. I would recommend you don't do what some people do and say, when they say, what service would you like? You say, oh, no service required. And the reason for that is if you're calling them, you're doing it for a reason, which is to tell them that you're there. And a basic service is exactly the same as saying no service required, and everybody understands what it is. So all you're going to get out of a basic service is they'll tell you if they think there's something important. So if the QNH changes or something dramatic happens, they might tell you. Or if they've got traffic that's of interest, they might tell you. It's not a traffic service, and we'll come to that at a different time. So ask for a basic service. And we'll talk about the other options you've got next week. So here's an example. It's the one that we're using, one of the ones that we're using in the breakout. So we're going from Little Rissington to Upper Hayford and back, and we're here somewhere. So what I want you to do is to take a pen and paper and write out your initial message. Just take a moment to do that. Oh, you're talking to Enstone, sorry. Correction, you're talking to Oxford, apologies. Oxford here. Okay, so this is what it should look like. Oxford approach, glider Golf Delta Echo Echo Juliet, request basic service. Very simple. So it's a standard sequence. You give your initial message, which is what we've done. They say, pass your message. You give the full message. They respond, and you respond with any readbacks. So that's the basic format that we're using for most of the things that we'll be talking about. So with your pen and paper, same example, write out your full message. So here it is. It's the call sign, it's the from and to, our position and level, and the QNH, and the next turning point. So glider Golf Delta Echo Echo Juliet, Little Rissington to Little Rissington, so many miles south of Enstone, 2,600 feet, QNH 1017. Next turning point, Upper Hayford, disused airfield. And we had a little conversation before everybody was joining about whether we should put the word altitude in there. And certainly it's not wrong. It's probably worth doing for the test. But if you've put that in and said QNH 1017, it's fairly clear what's happening. The controller's typical response to that full message might be to repeat the QNH or come back with something different if it's different. To confirm the service type, for example, basic service, give you any clearances or permissions you've asked for, and then he might come back with a request or a question, something he wants to know from you. You respond by reading back the required elements, which are in the pre-reading that you've done, and concluding with the glided call sign. So now the call sign is going to go on the end. And when we're providing new information to the controller, so in that initial and full message, our call sign goes on the front. And when we are acknowledging or reading back stuff, our call sign goes on the back of the message, on the end of the message. Read back items include things like clearances, runways, any mention of a runway, what the runway is. When you read that back, you have to read that back. Altimeter and stuff to do with altimeter and altitude, so settings and levels. So if they say not below a certain altitude, you've got to read that back. If they give you a QNH or a QFE, you've got to read that back. Anything to do with a service type, so basic service, traffic service, and so on. And any squawk, so that's the use of the transponder, which we'll talk about next week. So you'll get used to these. These are all the things that, if you think about it, are important. That if you get them wrong, somebody can crash or get hurt or have an air prox or something like that. If you get the level wrong or the altimeter setting wrong, things can go badly wrong. So it's a readback, and everybody needs to be sure that they've got that right. And this is probably much more important to people flying on instruments in cloud. So if you're doing an instrument approach, for example, and you get the altimeter setting wrong by 10 millibars, that can be fatal to a lot of people. So this is why that is there. Right. Just a quick interlude, just to remind coaches to add a star to their name. Chula will hopefully just be finishing off the breakout group allocation. If you don't have a star to your name, you won't get a group. Right, so a good opportunity to pause for any questions. David Coburn has made the good point that the CAA charts, by which I guess he means the 500K chart, has the call signs in the side panel, which I hadn't realized, but that's useful. So
I think the quarter mil does as well.
Does it? Okay. Very good. Are there any questions? Do unmute yourself and jump in with a question if you have one.
Yeah, reference to that last thing, Paul. It's only aerodromes with air traffic zones that have that table of ATS providers.
Okay, thank you. That's useful, because there are quite a few that don't have air traffic zones, particularly these days, because they charge for them. So a lot of people have dropped the ATZs that they once had.
In which case there will be radio. Yes, they will.
Will it?
Yep, you can't have a ATIS without an air traffic zone.
Okay. Good.
It's a quick question from me, if you don't mind.
Yep.
There is looking at the information about Oxford Airport. So they have approach at 121.090 or radar at 119.990. Why did we pick approach rather than radar for our call?
So which place is that?
So it's Oxford.
Oxford.
This very example.
Okay. So there are a number of places with multiple frequencies, and just a few around there. Oxford, Farnborough's got loads. Bryce Norton's got several, and you sort of have to know which one you want to talk to. So with Bryce Norton, Oxford, for example, you would talk to Oxford Approach, most likely. Radar would be providing a particular service to. Oh no, I'm not sure that's true. Actually, anybody help me here? Who would you start with? I would have looked on the chart to see.
In reality,
Radar.
yeah, I think the way, if you're not sure, just say Oxford, Oxford Approach, Oxford. Either would be good. And
Yeah, no, I think there's two questions here, Chris. If you've got
Yeah.
multiple frequencies, which do you go to? And if you don't know what the call sign is, what do you say? The which do you go to? I generally have decided which one I'm going to go to. I'd probably start with Approach for Oxford, and if they said no, wrong people, try to call Radar, then fine, I'd do that. If you don't know what the call sign is, as Chris says, you can just say Oxford rather than Oxford Radar or Oxford Approach. Or if you pick the one you think it's going to be, they'll correct you if you're wrong.
It is Oxford Approach that monitors the squawks.
Yeah, okay,
So
good.
that's
Thank you.
that's who you pick up. I mean, I just turn the squawk on and go to Oxford Approach. I don't talk to them, and then if they want
so
me, they
if,
talk.
yeah, that's the thing. I couldn't remember which one did the listening squawk. If you've got a transponder, and most glider pilots don't, then the listening squawk is very useful, and we'll get to that at a later time.
Yeah. Again, can I throw a quick one in? Again, off the CAA charts, it'll say approach. So that's your initial call, goes to the approach frequency.
Yeah, the ones
if they
that
want you
are
somewhere else,
tricky
they'll tell you.
are things like Bryce, where it's one service if you want a local airspace radar service outside the zone, but if you want to do a zone crossing, it's a different service. So there you need a bit of local knowledge to some degree.
Oh,
Can I'll just quick. It varies on the units, to be honest, and it's actually quite complicated. An example: I fly at Liverpool, and Liverpool Approach and Radar are never split; they're always the same.
Yeah.
Because I'm flying VFR, I call it approach, but I could call it either, and it's not really that. Well, I worked at Cardiff, and Cardiff actually has Cardiff Approach and Cardiff Radar, and all the VFR flights are put on Cardiff Approach, and they'll put the IFR onto Cardiff Radar. It's not
Cambridge has frequencies for a different frequency for Cambridge Radar and Cambridge Approach, but they always use the approach frequency, whether it's radar or approach. So you can look in the book and it'll tell you something wrong, basically.
And they'll often bandbox them together, so it's the same controller doing both frequencies, but you don't realise. So
okay, let's move on.
Can I just make one comment, because I think what was said about ATZs and ATCs was wrong. The list on the side of the half mil chart is radio frequencies for all the ATZs, many of which only have an air ground frequency.
Okay, I think David said something different, which was to have an ATZ, you need to have an AFIS. You can't do it with an
No, it was the other way around. If you wanted an AFIS, you had to have an ATZ.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, if it's not listed on the CAA chart, then it will be air to ground.
Yeah, no, that's both of the things.
No, it wasn't the other way around.
You have said
there are plenty of
then true.
ATZs that have just got air to ground.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's move on. In the UK, we have an unusually complex set of services that you can get compared with most other countries. And it's reasonably useful to understand the differences. So let's just remind ourselves of what the differences are. We can have air traffic control, and that, when we talk about a controller, these guys can actually control, at least within their ATZ or their regulated air or their controlled airspace. So they have an area of responsibility which can be an ATZ, it can be a Class D zone, it could be a MAT, so that's a military ATZ, which we'll talk about more next week, or it can be in Class G. And their call sign is going to be something like tower or approach or radar or the zone. So that will, if you get one of those, it's a big clue that you're talking to a controller. And they can give you clearances and instructions, and they can give you all the services, for example, basic service. So that's the top end of things. The one in the middle is AFIS, Airfield Flight Information Service, I think, and they've got a Flight Information Service Safety, Flight Information Service Officer, I think. They have an area of responsibility which is the airfield and local to the airfield, and they could well have an ATZ. And their suffix will be information. So they're mostly about giving you information. They can give you a basic service typically. They can control you on the ground, but not in the air. So they can't tell you what to do in the air. Whereas these guys, if you're in their ATZ, can tell you what to do. And then lastly, we've got an air-to-ground operator. These are similar in scope, in area to the FISOs. Their call sign is radio, and the only thing they can do is give you information. They can't tell you what to do, either on the ground or in the air. So if you talk to them, you'll probably just get an acknowledgement or some information. So you can ask them, we'll come to what you can ask them, but they can't tell you what to do. This is one of the areas where in real life, you can get a number of different responses. And for the purposes of the course, we're going to assume that they will respond in exactly the same way that everybody else will. So you ask them for something, they say, pass your message, you pass the full message, they'll give you the information that you've asked for, and then you'll read some of it back. And that's what we want you to do. In real life, sometimes they do something a little bit different. So if you ask them for some information like the airfield information, they might just give it to you. And then you're going to read the important things back, and maybe tell them something about what you're doing. But this is a bit non-standard. And I'm raising it not to say you should do this, but to say that you should be prepared if that happens. And when we talk about the Americans next week, we'll talk a bit about how to deal with them if you happen to talk to them on your way past Lakenheath and Milton Hall. But for the purposes of the course, we're going to do it this way. So the examples we've given you are the standard format for messages. Okay, so a chance to pause and have some questions on any of that.
All right, something I missed in the first one. I'm going to say for this one we won't, but will we have the same coaches as we did last time?
No, we allocate coaches randomly during these online sessions for two reasons. One is it shares the coaches out, and we've got a range of experiencing coaches. Secondly, it's just logistically impractical to do anything else.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any questions?
Paul, can I just ask you a technical question?
Yes.
For some reason, I think because I'm a co-host, I'm not appearing on the list of participants and with a star. So I was going to try and create a room with putting me in it. I've added a room. I'm trying to assign to it without big success. Any chance you can either do it later or?
Okay. Just put people in the room, Tudor, and I can assign you to it afterwards if you need to.
All right.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions on this thing? Because you need to understand this. Everybody happy?
Just a quick question. Would you always ask for a basic service from an AFIS? Would you assume that they can give a basic service?
You can, yes, you can get a basic service from an AFIS. Probably, if I was, depends a little bit on what I'm trying to achieve by talking to them. But if for example, I'm going fairly close and I'm going to stay on their frequency so they can tell me about any traffic and they can tell any traffic about me, then I just ask for a basic service.
Okay, sure, thanks.
Just to come back on the listening out thing, Paul, I mean, absolutely, because depending on the time of day, and you may get from Shopton, for example, one of the examples, they would normally be APHIS, but they might be radio depending on the day of the week, or they might all go home for the night, and you might just be calling traffic.
Yep.
Could be any of those three. So listening.
Sometimes you just got to start and see what happens.
Yeah.
In regards to the FISO and APHIS aerodrome, as Paul mentioned, they can control you on the manoeuvring area, but they can't control the runway. That's quite important. And you'll hear things like take off at your discretion or land at your discretion. They can't control the runway. It's just a small point.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. Although I've heard of them doing an MOR and somebody landed without being told that they could, which isn't.
Paul, sorry to interrupt again, Paul. Shall I go through the questions that are in chat?
Yes, please do.
Okay, what's the difference between request enter your zone and request basic service? So, if you are going to enter the zone, then you better ask for request enter the zone or zone transit. If you're not entering a piece of controlled airspace, then you can just ask for the basic service.
Yeah, so let me emphasize that, because I think that's a really, really good one. So if I'm going past Cambridge, for example, I'll get a basic service from 5 miles away from the ATZ. But if I need to go into their zone, then I specifically have to ask and get their permission. And you'll have seen in the pre-reading that you need to do different things according to which of these types of ATSU you're talking about. So here, for somebody with ATZ and air traffic control, these guys actually control that zone, their air traffic zone. So I have to ask their permission, and they will grant me permission to go into the zone. So they won't say I'm cleared, they'll say I'm approved to go into the zone. These two sets of people can't actually stop me going into the zone, but the CAA insist that we have got good radio communications with each other before I'm allowed to do it. So I can't just go into the zone without talking to them. I've got to set up that conversation, and it's polite to tell them what we're going to do. Thank you. Sheila, you want to go on?
Okay. Yeah. So the next one is, do the readbacks need to be in that order? I think that question probably means, Alessia, do they need to be in the order that you heard them? If that's the question, then yes, they do. So repeat them back in the order that you were given them.
Yeah, it's just plain easier to do that. If you don't get it in the right order, don't sweat it. It doesn't matter that much, but why not? Give it in the order that they told you. You remember, just give it back in the same order.
Okay, I'll read the next one. Paul, this one you can answer. Should I have the slides of the course materials? I have a lot of broken link 403 messages.
Should you have it? These slides are not in the course material. They will appear on the under the Zoom recordings session tomorrow when I put them up. If you've got any broken links, please let me know. They might, because I've changed a few things on the website, it might be a caching issue. The links work for me, but let me know if you've got.
Yeah, they're 403 error messages. I think that's a broken link, but I'm not sure.
Okay, just tell me where.
Okay, the altitude questions come up again. So we've had 2 discussions on it. My answer, Anthony, is first of all, the easy bit is if the controller sends descend altitude 6,000 feet, then definitely read back the word altitude. Otherwise, if you're saying 2,300 feet on a named QNH, then that implies altitude, but you can't be wrong to say altitude.
Yeah.
If it is
the time when you absolutely need altitude is if the controller says descend to altitude 1,500 feet, say.
Yeah.
Then it's mandated. The word altitude must be in there to avoid saying descend to 1,500 feet or something like that.
Yeah.
So that we were having a conversation earlier about whether when reporting an altitude, if you can say altitude 3,000 feet or 3,000 feet on QNH something.
So in my experience, the word altitude would come in when they're delivering you a clearance and you're reading back a clearance, so that's a change of altitude, then yeah, the world altitude is mandatory. Whereas if you're just reporting a position saying that you are at an altitude, then it's not necessary to use the word altitude. It's really just delivering and responding to a clearance.
Yeah, but Cat 413, they've got the word altitude scattered around liberally. So.
I was just talking about, from a every day at the office kind of experience, that's what happens.
Yeah, seems fit.
Okay, another question relates to when you're giving your position in the full message as X. Are kilometers acceptable? No, they're thinking nautical miles. So you're 10 miles southwest of Kidlington. So
yeah, you can't use kilometers. You've got to use nautical miles. Just divide the kilometers by 2. It's close enough.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, do we need to say nautical miles, or is miles are good enough? Is everyone assuming it's nautical miles?
If you talk about miles, you're talking nautical miles.
Yes.
Yeah,
yeah,
you can
always.
say miles.
Yeah.
Just let me read the next one before I read it out. Is it worth speaking to an air ground when you're passing nearby to let them know you're there? If so, what's the alternative call to basic service? Steph, that's you can ask for airfield information.
Yeah. Yes, it's worth doing. Airfield information will get you what runway they're on, what their QNH is, and any traffic that's around that they know about.
Okay, and the last one here is technical, Paul. So for you, I looked for the video of last week, but couldn't find it. I did clear my cache.
It's on the Zoom recordings section.
Okay, Nigel, let Paul know directly by email if you now can't find it after that. Paul, that's it from the writtens.
Excellent. Okay, in which case, let's see. It's time to practice. So what we want you to do is practice calls to an air-ground service so you can get airfield information, possibly traffic information if that's all you want. To air traffic, get a basic service. You can practice leaving the frequency, and you can deal with QNH differences and changes. So you might call saying I'm at 3,000 feet on 1012, and the controller might say Crownfield QNH 1014, in which case you need to repeat back 1014. So there's the sort of things that will happen, air ground, air traffic, or possibly an information service. If you run out of things to do in your groups, you can play some of the changes. So maybe ask to enter the ATZ to thermal. The coaches could go on to maybe reporting some traffic, into which your response is going to be either the traffic is in sight or not sighted. We don't want you to parrot from the script. We want you to learn the structure and put different examples in. So play around with where you are, what you're trying to do. Thank you, David, for pointing out that one of those scripts as an example as a Gransden Lodge to Gransden Lodge rather than a Little Rizzy to Little Rizzy. But again, we're trying to get you, and that's a mistake, but work on the structure and put in your own data. Coaches, a little plea to keep it to what we're teaching, if you can, and don't go too far into stuff that these students haven't dealt with yet. So that's it. This is the picture. I've put this on the website under the course materials part 2. So coaches, if you want to link to that, open it in a new tab on your computer, and then you can scale it. And if you want to, you can share screen to show that picture. Alternatively, students can just look at that and use it if they want to.
And Paul, you wanted a reminder about the chat.
Yes, thank you. I'll do that in a second. Next week, which is the last before Christmas, we're going to be dealing with types of air traffic control service, of which there are 4. We're going to be talking about crossing zones. So the slightly more complicated going through MATSs or going through Class Ds, which sounds scary but isn't really. We're going to be looking at landing at an airfield that we talk to if the day goes wrong. Transponders, and I promised you something about dealing with Americans, so we'll do that. There's a lot to learn next week. The course gets more complicated and busier as we go on. So nice easy start last week, a little more complicated this week, and it gets more fun as we go. So lots to learn. That's it from me.